Hey there, how you doing today?
Hey, Hector. I'm doing all right, man. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. I'm enjoying a little bit of the background noise of the rain. I like to introduce you to our show here on the Combo Show. We're having Alec Martinez from Red Wing United, a mutual aid society in Laredo, Texas. I brought him on the show today because there is a video he shared on his social media page through the Red Wing United. Can you speak about who you are, your organization, and then we'll go into the major thing that I think is big news in my opinion. So where are you coming from, Alec?
So, my name is Alec. I'm a member, certainly not the leader. We're a horizontal organization, but a member of Red Wing. We're an organization based out of Laredo. We focus primarily on mutual aid, but our goal is to achieve liberation for all people, and we have certain ideas about how that works. But a lot of that is putting a lot of these institutions in the hands of the community for autonomy, for self sufficiency. And so Red Wing does a lot of that stuff: cooperatives, mutual aid, education, you name it, we've done it. During the water crisis in Laredo, where we went like 4 or 5 weeks without clean water, we held water drives to provide water for the South Laredo, but also, and perhaps just as importantly, we held a town hall to teach people how it is we got there in the first place. Right? It wasn't just by happenstance that we had that crisis. There were a lot of steps, a lot of mismanagement that got us there. So it's for us, it's like, okay, there are problems that are facing us right now, but instead of just fixing them, let's fix them and ask them why they're there to begin with. So that's Red Wing's sort of MO, I guess.
I was reading an article that was mentioning your history of activism and how it originated. And this is a catch-22 thing about the mutualist horizontal structure of your society. Coming from the Laredo free thinkers, we operate within a model of the same essence. And whether, you put yourself in the phase as a leader or not, people usually just see that phase and they are drawn to it. And then from experience that is to be true. So
Correct.
I brought you into this show because there is a misconception in the Laredo community that I've been hearing from different people, different sources, that you've guys been getting death threats. You've been, can you talk about that? And why do you think there's a misconception about what you guys do if you're helping the community?
Well, I think a lot of these threats only come up when we're challenging the authorities and the powers that be. So when we first started getting threats, this is unfortunately not our first time. When we first started getting threats was when the water crisis happened, and it wasn't because we were giving out water. It was because we were teaching people about El Pico water plants and the FBI raid on City Hall and the mismanagement of public tax dollars on not getting people the bare necessities of clean water. And that was sort of the first time, is when we called out our local leaders. The more recent one came after the protests that we had at City Hall. Now, we are fundamentally focused on improving the community, but sometimes improving the community means holding our leaders accountable because they are leading our community astray or otherwise mismanaging the trust of the community. And it is when that happens that we start getting those threats. And so when we had our city hall protest, when we drafted our 9 points and delivered them or tried to deliver them to City Hall, it was only then that we started getting those threats. People think that we are, that we hate cops and want to see all of them, out of work, which is certainly painting us with a broad brush. People think that, we want crime and to go rampant. People think all sorts of things, that we're violent. That was a big one, because we were armed in self-defense. And so because of a lot of those things, we've had a lot of police, threaten us, intimidate us. We've been held up at Border Patrol checkpoints unnecessarily. We've had FBI come to our home. We've heard through the grapevine certain police groups wanting to drum up charges on us. You name it, we've heard it. And unfortunately, it's just a part of the work that we're doing.
Right, because it's a big city, but it's almost a small town because everyone knows themselves in some way, cops, sheriffs. local community council members and leaders. And, this is not a spotlight where I'm going to rant and tell you all my opinions. I would like for you to tell me, what do you think is the main problem in Laredo society?
I think the problem with Laredo society is very much the problem that we see in our national society, which is these powerful structures that were built by the hands of the people, that are funded by the work of the people, that are supposed to be by and for the people, have been so far removed from from the goodwill of the people. They no longer watch or serve our community. And when you've got these powerful institutions, things like the government, that can only achieve that kind of power through, a monopoly on violence and a monopoly on our tax money, you've got institutions that are very, very powerful. And the moment you sever the tie between the community that they were supposed to serve and all of that power, you get tyranny, you get corruption, you get a lack of democracy. The extravagant evolution of that is fascism, and we've seen that happen in history many times. And so in Laredo, we called it the Patron System, which is essentially the same thing. It is mini fascism. It is a handful of tyrants that have absolute domination through all sorts of means, legal and not, over all that makes up our world, our everyday life. And so, to take a quick little example, you can follow the money, right? And a lot of people will say, well, it's happening legally, so it must be moral. But legality and morality are very different. And so when we look at the city of Laredo budget, for example, you've got the library that gets $4 million a year. And those are all of our public libraries. In Laredo, we've got a 33% poverty rate. So you've got a lot of kids that are struggling in that regard. And these libraries are the only way, or perhaps one of the only good escapes for whatever kind of environment they might have at home. It's a place where they can get free education, free resources for thousands of Laredo children, and that's $4 million. Now, you take a look at our police budget, and it goes all the way up to $75 million. And we think, okay, $75 million, that must mean Laredo is the safest place on earth. But you see that's not the case. In America, we've got the most people incarcerated out of any other country on earth. We have some of the highest rates of police shootings than anywhere else on earth. And so just because we have funded them, because we have equipped our police with SWAT trucks and anti-personnel rocket launchers, sniper rifles, and helicopters, does not make us any safer. What it does mean is that there is a huge power dynamic between our government, the people who run it, and the police that defend that sort of status quo, and the rest of the community. So while Laredo continuously votes to increase the police budget $75 million, just 2 days ago, they announced that they were going to start cutting water access to people affected by coronavirus. So the people that had to take a quick pause because they lost their jobs that probably aren't coming back, they're going to get cut out from clean water access. So that disparity, that 75 million for police, and yet you are not providing clean water to your people. I mean, let's start there and let's analyze that. And we must ask ourselves, well, what is the point of government then? Why is it that it's so lopsided on the side of violence and repression and oppression? You would think Laredo's full of criminals if we have to have a $75 million, mini military in our streets. We were told, through the grapevine, that they had sniper rifles pointed at us during the protests. And we're kids, people as young as 15, 16 were there. So when you've got your government pointing sniper rifles at 16-year-olds, you know that something's not right. And so that gap between the community and the lack of community control over our democracy, over our housing, over our workplace, that's everything. That is a source of so many of our problems.
It's a big picture. It's a long story, and we can reference into federal programs like Operation Stone Garden. But if you recall the media narratives, there is a perception that the border town region is a criminal world where it's just everything is running loose and there is no law and order. But the bigger story here is, I think, if you backtrack the whole campaign of terror during the 9/11 scare, it was systematically going, by systematic, I mean it was going towards targeting individuals in the community. First, it was the other Middle Eastern of origin people, and then it got closer to home. So, and you were mentioning these tools of oppression where we, used to assume that they were going to be for our own benefit. And, like your first statement, you were saying how, well, we're perceived to be wanting disorder, lawlessness, but you're explaining right now, no, we're trying to combat against this disorder, this disparity we see. How did you get inspired to enter into this domain of activism? Because it is a complicated thing and it's a lifelong journey. So how did it start for you?
I think a lot of people, myself included, are haunted by the vision of what the world could be, right? I think I remember at some point distinctively in my childhood, sort of getting up to the age where I was kind of looking around me and thinking, is this it? I thought there was going to be more to life than this. I was hoping that there was going to be more to life than this, more freedom, more magic, more connection, uh, more community, more love, more communication, uh, and I remember thinking, why none of these things, when you are bold enough to take things at face value, forget the conditioning that you've received, and ask yourself, okay, technology has evolved in leaps and bounds since the Industrial Revolution and the decades after. We are able now to sit down and do work in an hour that used to take days back in the early 1900s, right? And yet, despite all those technological advancements that allow us to do more work in less time, our hours haven't been cut. We're still working 40-hour weeks. Ronald Reagan, for as conservative as he was, and Nixon both said during the presidencies that the 40-hour work week was antiquated, that we were going to get rid of it pretty soon. And yet here we are in 2020. The minimum wage has stayed stagnant. Our hours per week have stayed stagnant, if not increased. Health, the life expectancy in America has decreased. And so you look at all these things and you go, the world could be so much more beautiful. Life could be so much more enjoyable if, instead of focusing or building this entire human project around maximizing profit for a small number of people, if instead we focused on creating the most pleasurable experience, the safest and most dignified experience for as many human beings as possible. And we could do that. And so when you think about something like social safety nets, a lot of conservatives, pull the whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps argument. But if you know that some folks have physical or mental disabilities, some folks are struggling with drug addiction, kids don't have good role models at home, right? The only way you're going to be able to intervene with all those things is through robust public programs. And if we do that, we can make sure that everybody, no matter what their handicap, physical, mental, emotional, whatever it is, they can get what they need to overcome that and become the most productive, kind members of society as possible. But we do the opposite. We rip all that away. And we must think that crime is no one's a natural born criminal. That doesn't happen. Crime is a product of desperation, which is a product of poverty, right? That is the only way. Rich people don't rob banks, at least not in the way that we traditionally conceive of it. And so when you start to look at the world of this way of going, wow, if our government, this thing with all this power and this money, served its people, this experience of being alive could be so much more profound, and we would have to struggle so much less if we just changed some very key things. And I remember several times as a younger person being hit so dramatically by that vision, so much so that for me, it would be better to live and die 1,000 times fighting for a better world than to just stand idly by in this one. And every other visionary and person who's willing to think outside the box and who's brave enough to imagine an alternative, that is what drives them. It's this idea that this world can be so much better and so much more beautiful than what it is right now.
Playing devil's advocate, because in an effort for balance, because there are so many people that watch your stuff and they follow it and they come from different perspectives. I was looking at your page, different people were commenting, get a job, you're bored. Those are the very first things that come out of their mind or their mouth, because that's where they're coming from. It's a psychological perception that they're embracing, and as a devil's advocate here, I know that the first word that flies out of people's mind is idealistic. You're idealistic and you don't know how society really works, and you need to get more experience with life before you start making these changes. Now, you mentioned the perception of conservatism in people's mind of like strapping yourself up from the boot up, down from the down and going up, up, up on your own willpower. The idea of the American dream, American exceptionalism, you can come in here and you build your own future. I'm going to be done with this. I'm not going to take too much of your time. We were thinking about this. Okay, you mentioned that traditionally people don't conceive banking interests as looting or stealing. That's what they won't see. See, I wanted to bring you to the show because people don't fully understand the philosophical or political nuance of different types of political persuasions. In the discussion, they only speak of the left or the right. So there's this limited debate, and that closed discussion doesn't allow for different possibilities, because the major trend that is occurring in worldwide is worldwide demonstrations, but people are finding out the normal human engagement, mutualist aid societies or whatever ism, is actually a solution to moving forward. Okay, but what do you say to the people, again, playing devil's advocate here, that tell you these things? You're idealistic, you lack experience, you don't know what the world is about. What is your response to that?
I love that argument. I love that argument because it's a really easy one to talk about, I think. So taking the example of climate change, what I think is idealistic is thinking that we can continue extracting and consuming at the rate that we are expecting that this earth isn't going to shake us off in a few decades, right? When you think about the current system, which is one of capitalism, right? Capitalism is an ideology, is an economic philosophy based on an eternal growth, and that's why corporations have to show that they have growth, 3%, 4% growth in profit every year, so that their stakeholders get a little cut of that. Now, to think that we can eternally excavate on infinitely excavate on a finite planet is by definition idealistic. It is imaginary. That cannot happen. Mathematically, resources will run out. So when you have this fundamental ideology that underlies all of our corporations or governments of limitless growth on a limited planet, with limited resources, that gap is delusion. And so when people say, well, you're delusional for wanting to change it, I say you're delusional for thinking that you can keep doing what you're doing without having massive ramifications. People are eventually coming around to this. But to say that all the people waking up to the fact that this life ain't shaking out for most of us, and I'm not even talking about America, where people do enjoy a certain quality of life. I mean, there is some extreme poverty in America, and I don't mean to wash that away, but worldwide, that there are so many human beings in suffering as a result of this system, that they're standing up and saying, it is time that we change this. To wave that off as idealistic is to ignore the writing on the wall. And I think that is a very dangerous thing indeed. And much of our philosophy is based on work. This morning, Red Wing got together at 6 a.m. To start on a garden project. So from 6 a.m. to 2 in the afternoon in the hot sun, 10 of us were out with pickaxes and shovels, tilling the earth, right? Sweating and tired, exhausted. My body's so sore right now. So it's not that we don't like to work. It's that we don't want the fruits of our labor to be stolen from us by somebody we will never meet. And so you've got a lot of millennials and a lot of Zoomers that are working minimum wage jobs who are looking at a very bleak future before them. and they want something different. They want to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They want to be dignified in their work. They want to control their work. They don't want to have to go to work on somebody else's terms. They want to set their own schedules, because such is, a very basic demand of human dignity. And to say that that's idealistic, um, you're ignoring a roar, and that roar is getting louder. But fundamentally, I think people who are ascribing to keeping the status quo are delusional. I mean, there's nothing beyond that. It's delusion. They're idealistic.
I'm glad you're actively pursuing your ideas. That could be said. That is a very good thing, because it doesn't happen in whatever political persuasion. People usually have this intention, but they don't follow through. Now, for this show, I am very interested in the open discussion so that we can learn some new things. And coming from where I'm coming from, see the idea of what people think about community and their value and their labor. And you've spoken about how these things are extracted or taken away from it. Now, one of the things that I've looked into and researched through these things is that the whole structure of what people believe to be capitalism is not necessarily the main story. The main story is that our value and our time and energy is destroyed through the currency manipulation. And you probably already understand this and have seen it in some different points. And in different communities where there's actual activism going beyond the left and the right, they've actually understood that there is an importance into the currency. I know it seems kind of like trite and not human, because I think I can understand where you're coming from. And if I'm incorrect, let me surmise it so you don't think that I'm not you're taking your opinion for granted. So you believe or you assume where you're coming from, that the civil structures of power, people identify with them because they think that they have a stake in it. But in the long term, in reality, they don't. They get robbed of their labor and their time, and benefits the bottom line of very succinct centralized power. Okay, so far we are on the same page, correct?
So far, pretty solid.
Right. Okay. So where I'm coming from, I've seen the same thing, and I think we can reach the same conclusion. And man, I'm reaching out to you because this is a lifelong struggle, as you know. And the main objective or the main struggle in doing these new models of organizations is keeping the spirit alive, keeping the culture, because people are identified with that particular system. Now, coming from, or where am I? What am I doing? Free market anarchist, meaning like, there is a society outside of the system that we don't have to operate and we don't have to leverage to our advantage. We can use these things, but the long-term plan is taking responsibility over our own community, having autonomy over it, community, currency, and authentic change. Okay, the reason that I bring into that perspective is because you mentioned capitalism, but the main objective, in my opinion, is to go beyond the isms, because if we get caught up in it, that's what gets people so activated, because they think that you're coming after their job. They think that you're after their law and order. They're so identified with it, they're not going to see what you are already doing, actively pursuing a better world. Anyways, what do you think about that aspect? And we don't have to agree, but I just love the conversation to keep on going. Do you think that currency is an aspect that you would look into, or do you think that is something that you're more not focused into and you find better solutions somewhere else? What do you think?
Well, to hit on your last point, and I think you brought up a good point, which is the isms tend to divide. So it would be naive to say you can have a collection of any ideas, and if you have somebody, an academic or otherwise, that knows their stuff, they can label whatever grouping of ideas you have. So every ideology, like, just because you don't name something an ideology doesn't mean there isn't a title in existence to define that. And so while isms do divide, at the end of the day, we're all something. No one is nothing. They might not know the name of what they are, but everybody is something. And that kind of goes against this idea of, like, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to get political, but the fundamental nature of our reality is that everything is political. Everything is a struggle between parties. And I don't mean political parties, I mean groups or classes of people. Everything is an exchange. Everything is about the breakdown of power and resources and who gets what. That is the summation of our civilization. So everything is political, and everybody has a political ideology. However, you are right in saying that when you come out with it first, when you come out saying I am X-ism, people do get turned off. And that's why Red Wing, we don't come out and say we are X anything. These are our ideas. These are this is our buffet of thought. And you can ascribe to us whatever you like. But that technique has really brought in a lot of people of a lot of different political persuasions. And that is the point, right? Because you'll find that most people in Laredo have more in common than we have, and most people in America have more in common than we have different. And when we can focus on those commonalities, when we put the isms to the side and just talk about the ideas, 9 times out of 10, everybody wants the same thing. But because of the conditioning of sort of popular media and narratives, the moment you label it, there's that defense mechanism of like, well, that's not what I've been told that is, and therefore you and I can no longer work together. When we get onto the topic of money, money is an interesting one, right? Because money is ultimately in a free exchange of goods and services. I personally believe that what gives any sort of commodity value is the crystallized human labor that is in that, right? So you've got commodities throughout an economy, each of which contains human labor of some sort, whether that's a blanket containing a weaver's labor, or a shirt containing a sort of a seamstress's labor, a car, an engineer's labor, whatever. These are useful commodities that contain human labor. And so when, instead of hauling around all of your goods to change one good for another or 10 goods for another, even the ability to do so, let's go back to feudal times or agrarian times, to say, well, I'll give you 10 sheep for 1 cow. What you're saying is that at some point, all of these commodities have something in common, because you can exchange them. What changes is proportion. I'll give you 2 shirts, a blanket, and some shoes for for you to build this part of my house or whatever. So what is the common denominator for all of these things? And that's human value. And so when you throw money into it, money is sort of the emblem. It's the representative of that human value that is in all of these commodities. But beyond that, it is also a commodity itself. And so that's where you get into all this tricky, financial weirdness that underlies a ton of the American economy today, is securities and collateralized debt obligations, and the stock market, which has nothing to do with the regular person, is when you begin to speculate upon this commodity, and has this dual nature of being the product of exchange, but also this thing that you can invest in and manipulate. And that's the reason why we have a recession every 10 years, because it's built on nothing. It is this imaginary facilitation, this swapping of hands, and it is a very predatory one, right? 2008 financial crash happened because banks were giving out subprime mortgage loans to unsuspecting families, and then packaging all of that debt together and selling it to external entities. So going back to the home serves 2 purposes. It is either something that shelters you or your family, its use value, or it is something that you want to flip for the most profit, and that's its exchange value. And so many things that are really just meant to keep human beings happy and sheltered and sustained are now exchange values. It's all commodified. It's all exchange. And that's where you get these nasty talons into every human communal thing is now no longer human or communal. It's an opportunity for profit. And you get lost in the sauce. And now when you ask somebody what they want to do when they grow up, they'll spit a profession at you that they think will give them the most money. And that's the extent of the human imagination.
So this is a really important conversation, and it's going to be published for the community to decide. And through this conversation, they will make up their mind. Now, let me reply to what you said. There are things that I do really agree with you. It is imaginary. The economy is not based on fundamentals. The economy of the stock market is not reflective of the individual reality that is happening throughout the whole nation. That is true. And I've talked about this in my podcast updates and things like that. If you're interested in that data, it's there. 40 million of Americans unemployed. You know, for the listener to really, I know that you're already aware and informed. I know where you're coming from, but I'm saying for the listener or the follower, go ahead and get into this data. But coming from this perspective, saying full disclosure as a human being, free market anarchy, what it means to me, not to be conflated with capitalism. Capitalism is an ideological structure that has been generationally accepted by people who believe there's a stake into it. Anyways, but what is money? To my opinion, it is a ruler, a metric of value. Now, that's an abstract concept that also, like math, can lead us to rational, objective terms. But okay, why is it that we are working more and earning less? That's the main question that is getting to everybody's life. That doesn't have to do even with like, oh, my philosophy and shit like that. No, it has to do with why is it that I can't get ahead? There's various reasons as to why that is. Again, it goes to these recessions that are manipulated and artificially politicized by the left and the right politicians. They start these different types of monetary policies that are meant to keep people in this stability mode. But what it really does, it externalizes the risk. You've heard this, and it's a very popular rephrase, and I can actually agree with it because it talks about privatizing the profits and socializing the risk. But well, that problem, what it really is pointing to is that the currency of control. The more you earn, the more you have to spend it quickly because it's not going to last for tomorrow. Savings are distorted. And that goes again to banking central policy. And we're two individuals who have learned these things on our own, I presume. So there is no real expertise in where we're coming from. But what I'm saying for real, people get upset about this because they really want to manifest the best life they can without having to make decisions about every political thing. But you're right on the other aspect of it. Everything is political, but everything at the same time could be repossessed and reclaimed to better the community. So what I was extending you the idea of currency is that even if you didn't, like, I know it's a popular thing because across the political aisle, people will throw the word Bitcoin at you. They will throw the word and they'll say, this will fix this. This will fix this. There are some communities, like, I don't know if you heard of of a man named Isaiah Jackson. He's actively pursuing this. There's a book, you might be interested in it, called Bitcoin and Black America. So there is some grassroots effect to it, but I'm going to give you the short end of it. Why is it important? All right. So you have a central authority of politicians who decide what value is, and they rig the system to benefit the political entrenched class people there. So it's going to only benefit them immediately. So the very first people who are interconnected with the banks, the politics, and all this other stuff, they get the money at 0% credit, cheap money that they can use and make the geniuses of the supermarket economy they supposedly are. If you look at the Bill Gates or you look at other big business people, you know, like the CEO of Amazon, the guy made $112,000 per hour, I think, during the lockdown crisis. So whatever pattern of philosophy we have, ultimately, it enriches a few people. But what I'm trying to point out here is that we don't have to participate because if we're using their currency, and if we're participating in their politics, we're powering up their system inadvertently. It doesn't mean we can't use strategies. It doesn't mean we can't resist in some organized way. It just means from the perspective as an individual libertarian. I know we're not sharing the same perspective on this, but come on, you could see we're looking towards the same conclusion, you know? And you know, that's where we're going. And if we could really explore this ideas, I'm going to challenge you to come onto the show and we can explore this once in a while. I know you're busy, you got your own ideas, but I don't want to get focused on the disagreement just right now. I just want to put it to the audience that there are other tools outside of this perspective that, you know, we are not allowed to merge and fuse ideas. So I'll leave that to your perspective. Remember, I'm thinking that money is something we can reclaim as a tool and use it for a better community. The Federal Reserve, the government, they are taking it for their own benefit. Anyways, what I really want to talk about, Alec, now we're talking about where you're coming from, the good stuff that you're doing. And now I've watched the video on Facebook that you shared, and that it really brings me chills because I've been, as an activist in Laredo, I've been talking about this stuff for years. And now it's coming to help, like people like yourself. I'm getting upset. You bring it up and tell me, what is the story, man? Tell us.
Well, a few days after this Laredo City Hall protest.
And what did you guys do in the City Hall protest? Because remember, let's imagine that we don't know what you guys are up to. What happened? You might be terrorists or something.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you would think according to the police. So we held two peaceful protests. One of which was armed. The first one, it was armed. We had a sign detailing why we were armed. Two of our individuals, one male, one female, were armed for a few reasons. One is when you take a look at, I believe it was in 2018, that gentleman, that absolute monster that fascist that drove from Dallas to El Paso, specifically because he knew that there were going to be a high concentration of Hispanic people there, to shoot up a Walmart, killing almost 30 people. When you read his manifesto, you see that he was targeting specifically crowds of brown people. That was his goal. That could have easily been Laredo. Laredo is a 96% Hispanic population. God only knows why he chose El Paso and not Laredo, but it easily could have been us. It could have been the Valley, right? And we have to. It's an ugly thing to arm ourselves and to be standing out with weapons and to say we have to do this, but it is a real thing. And Red Wing is very interested in what is real, what is material, and materially we must defend ourselves. The risk of protesters, of counter protesters being there and becoming violent. We had a few of our members who were already getting threats saying, "Oh, I'm going to show up and I'll keep my eye on you. I'm going to find you." And a lot of these were women that were getting these threats, and so we felt the need to have to defend ourselves, especially because if something were to happen, our whole purpose of being there is to showcase that the police don't need to be as militant as they are. They don't need $75 million. And the first follow-up question that we always get, well, is something happens in your neighborhood, who are you going to call then? And a good answer to that is, well, we hope to be able to defend ourselves. And so a big part of Red Wing is teaching people how to defend themselves. And so both parties that were there were armed, trigger control, had shot many times before, safety on, the whole thing. So we show up, and this was a part of the sweeping protests all across America for George Floyd, but beyond that, for a radical reimagining of the police state. So we were there, very, very peaceful, did a few marches around City Hall, and then we drafted up 9 points, 9 demands for City Hall. The protest was on Saturday. We returned Monday, and we wanted to deliver these 9 demands to our city manager and our mayor, who locked the door and said that we were not welcome in because, of course. And so we were metaphorically and literally met with locked doors. And as we tried to enter City Hall, this is as symbolic as symbols get, as we tried to enter City Hall, this democratic institution paid for by the citizens of Laredo to peacefully deliver these demands on behalf of hundreds of young people in Laredo that want to see change. The doors were locked, and police stood in the way, right? So you've got these armed police in the middle, these locked doors, and our city leaders, our representatives, up in this high tower of City Hall. And so that is in a nutshell what our government is, right? So we walked away. We didn't escalate. We left that day. But a few days later, and we'd kind of caught wind that something was going to happen. We'd received some text messages saying that the FBI was going to try to drum up charges on us. A few days later, we had the FBI show up at our house. And we go out there, and it's 3 men in plain clothes, so they weren't wearing any identification, in unmarked vehicles, and in the middle of the day, saying, we just want to talk to you. And we were ready for this. We had already sought legal assistance, and the number one thing they told us is they're going to say a lot of things to get you to talk. But what they're going to do is they're going to try to get you to twist your words, because lying to the FBI is a 5-year sentence. So they're going to ask you a lot of complicated questions, and they're going to try to get you on there because they're looking for anything. So what you got to do is just not talk to them. Just don't talk to the FBI ever, And so they showed up, and we said, we don't want to talk to you. We would rather have an attorney present. And, the oldest trick in the book for the FBI is to say, well, it's not about you. There's no reason to get an attorney. Don't worry about it. You're not a part of a criminal investigation. To which I thought, well, then why are you visiting me at my house in the middle of the day? Like, are you just on your lunch break? Do you just come to chit chat? Obviously not. So they left. We did not speak with them. but we've heard so many rumblings about them trying to, dig up dirt. We had, members as young as 19, them trying to get into their dorm rooms to see if they have drugs or weapons in their dorm. All sorts of crazy things, and we posted that video. Very scary, by the way. You begin to jump at every shadow and every noise because you never know, are they going to raid my house? We know activists who've been raided also in Laredo. And so we wanted to post that video because we wanted to show the exaggeration, the hyper extension of the police states. You had these young kids, again as young as 16, had snipers pointed at them. The FBI surveilling them simply for expressing their dissent. That is a constitutional right. We must remember that the FBI has always been the thought police, right? When America was going through the days of McCarthyism, the FBI did that work. When the Black Panthers and a whole bunch of organizations of the like started to arise in the 60s and 70s, it was the FBI and the CIA who carried out COINTELPRO, which was literally, from the document, stopping the rise of a Black Messiah. They did not want for people to be expressing these ideas. And the FBI did the dirty work of that. And if you look deep enough, you can find everything from car bombings to the planting of evidence, of drugs, of false allegations, political prisoners. A lot of people think that America doesn't have political prisoners, but that is not true. So we are certain that this is not the end, but having the FBI show up to your house because you led a protest is exactly why we are asking for dramatic changes to the way we think of policing.
Yes, I can imagine that. And the counterintelligence program is a very effective tool. If you look into the case of the Black Panthers, they asked one of the actual members to snitch on others, give them the blueprints to their headquarters and allow them to raid them. So there's a quote from George Orwell that talks about betraying each other. It's not only about being human. If you notice that you remember the story of 1984, Winston betrayed his lover for the state so that he can stop the pain. That's the main thing here. Like, we're talking about the division between people, and we're betraying each other. My question that comes to mind here, because I've written about some, do you remember during the Lockbit crisis lockdown, there were people who were unable to participate in the business economy, in the free market economy, because of government guidelines. The people that were operating illegally, their barbershops, some of their neighbors called the police on them. Now, okay, fast forward to now, to today, there's a culture of division in Laredo, whatever theme or news we talk about. I wonder, who is it that reported you? Who said that? Because someone has to say, these people are a threat. These people are acting up. And you know what? Natural rights. You defending yourself in a protest when you know the heated political environment is, it's not proactively evil or violent. It's your self-defense. And that's, man, it's awful, because what other thing are we going to do? What if we don't speak out and unite with each other, depending on whatever we're doing? Then this is not going to go anywhere. Now, okay, let's fast forward and talk about something more proactive, because, okay, so you mentioned about the targeting of leaders, of Black leaders, you know, because they don't want someone to be a target or a focus for change and things like that, right? So now, from my research and from my experience, just doing something of the things that you've done before, I told you, from my experience, the most important thing is keeping the culture alive. And talk to me 5-10 years from now. That's the major freaking obstacle we're facing, because, you know, these things are not going to change. And there are so many structures in it that are hard, like mountains, to climb. But the point here is, see, I like to propose for people to learn about localized leaderless resistance, localized leaderless decentralized resistance. Now, the idea that we from the Laredo Free Thinkers of the experience and talked about is the idea of freedom cells. Now, have you seen in the past, in the model of 1960s, where people are collectively getting together? That's a good tactic and it's a good strategy, but we're talking about powering up the world we want to live for, not about the world we want to live against. Talking about that thing, leaderless. Do you feel like you're in danger? Do you feel like you're scared? Do you feel, make it publicly known where you're coming from? Because you've mentioned before, I'm no leader, but at the same time, I don't want people to have the misconception that you're not actively participating to guide people to a better world. Please tell us, What do you think? Do you feel any fear? Do you feel any fear in your heart?
I'd be lying to you if I said no. When you live under the shadow of a police state that has shown that it is willing to go to extreme lengths to retain its power, you can't help but feel full of anxiety and full of stress. And like I said, you know, I often wake up in the middle of the night hearing a sound outside my bedroom. You know, you look out in your rearview mirror when you're coming home from grocery shopping, and you wonder, has that car been following me? You know, all these thoughts. Is there a bug in my apartment? Can, you know, they're listening now, and that is why, you know, to take a page out of that book you were just saying, why people are so willing to snitch out on the other is because the alternative is to live in fear, right? I would love to not feel like the FBI is breathing down my neck. I would love to just continue what I'm doing and be unharassed by strange men with guns and big shady glasses. But I'll quote Malcolm X, who said, you know, if you are fearful of death, then you need to take freedom out of your vocabulary. And unfortunately, when you look at the bend of history, a lot of the people that did this work did not get to meet old age. A lot of those people were assassinated or imprisoned. And when I say we, I mean the police state routinely picks those people off, whether that's assassination of character or literal assassinations. It does happen. And so, yeah, there is an aspect of fear here. But the magic is it comes down to two things. It is, one, believing in your community and believing that the community has your back. And when we shared that video, it was very obvious that the community does have our back. And now, if anything were to happen to me or any of the members of Red Wing, it would be clearly obvious what happened. And the community would gather around that. And that's a beautiful thing. Our power, our defense, everything, that any ounce of power that Red Wing can claim to have comes from the people. It doesn't come from our weapons. It doesn't come from our ideas. It doesn't come from any of that. It comes from the power that our community has inherently invested in them. And by extension, anything that we have is extended by them. And so that's number one, right? That gives me hope. And the other thing, the only thing more powerful than that fear of our current world is love for the possible world. The only thing greater than the threat of the violence of today is the peace of tomorrow. And that is what I carry with me in my everyday. There is nothing that would scare me out of the conviction I have that the beautiful life that we could all inhabit is possible if we only strive together for it. And that will always be greater in my mind. And so when you read a lot of the writings of the Black Panthers, of Malcolm, of Martin, of a lot of these freedom fighters in America, they all knew that death was reality and victory was the dream, to take the words out of Huey's mouth. And you just gotta, at some point, take a deep breath, accept it, and move forward. And that's kind of where I am with it. So.
Well, I'm glad you have clarity of mind. This is a very difficult task, and I understand why people choose not to. It's that very same thing. You know, they internalize the surveillance state and start betraying one another, and nothing gets accomplished. And you know, there's nothing new under the sun. This is the perpetual struggle of history. People get fed up, they get angry, and the violence of the state continues to grow. And then they divide and rule us, and with some betrayal in between. And that's what I want to prevent. And I think our mutual objective, you know, as people who care, as individuals who really care and want to change our community, is to create as many leaders as possible and to universalize the power of action and self-actualization. Where I'm coming from, just to let you know, the self-actualization, meaning you have to go out and do it. You actually have to believe in yourself and do something concrete with your actions, and not let others decide for you and choose for yourself. That's the main objective here, keeping the culture alive. And I hope that you can continue to join us on the program, Alec, because hey, we can learn a lot from each other. And remember, like you were saying, you know, everyone in the community has your back. You know that already. And that's why I want to promote this story and keep it alive, because they're going to target us one way or the other, and we don't have to be in terror. We can be proactive and go beyond. Do you have any final thoughts? And before I forget, I want to ask you, I know you have some funding links. So where is the best place to support you? Where can we find you? And what is the next step?
I appreciate that question. Right now, we're doing a free AC repair and replacement for elderly folks. The other day was like 107, and projections show that summers are only going to get hotter. So we're trying. We had 250 submissions. You know, each one of those is $100, if not more. So we're going to try to help as many people as possible. But like you mentioned, you know, the work is never finished. There are always more people that need help. So you can find links to donate to Red Wing in general. Right now, that is a big project we're working on. We're also starting a garden to have just a constant flow of food that we can give out to the community. Yes, so if you go to our Facebook, there's a link to our GoFundMe, and you can find the link there. I believe it is just gofundme.com/red-wing, but you can check it out. Yeah, right there.
I had it ready just for you.
Thank you very much.
Because dude, I understand how hard it is to get people involved, and you need a lot of money to make these things happen.
Yep.
I just wish that on our next conversation, we focus on that. That way we can get you as much funding as possible. Trust me, man, decentralized blockchain currency will allow us to make these dreams a reality. And that's where I want to get to it. So I'm going to all right.
You need to teach me more.
Repeat that again, because it got cut off with my interruption.
No, that's okay. I'm looking forward to learning more about that. I know you and all the folks at Laredo Free Thinkers, you guys have a lot to teach. And so if y'all ever want to hold like a little class for us, I know about a dozen of us would love to learn more about that, because y'all are right. It is a part of our future. And if we want to opt out, that is a critical part of it. So if y'all ever are kind enough to host a little class about it, we'll be there for sure.
I am glad that you bring that up, because it interconnects with what I also was suggesting. Thank you. I will. And we'll talk about those details later after this show. This is your friend, Hector Combo. Today, I had a wonderful guest, Alec Martinez. And I want to remind you that you have to think globally, but you have to act locally. Everyone wants to get connected with the nationwide headlines, but we forget about our local community. And if we forget about it, we're losing out on the big picture. Because our brothers, our sisters, our neighbors, our family members, those are the most important people we have in our life, and we need to raise them up together. Thank you very much for joining me today. This is your friend, Hector Combo, signing off. Until then, I'll be right with you after this message.